pine trees standing which have turned brown and the leaves are falling. If that's continuing over a long span of time, as probably happened in Siberia, acid rain would kill all of the plant life.
Day in and day out, the caustic liquid rains down on every corner of the globe, killing all the vegetation. And for those with no place to hide, daily life becomes excruciating. Only our ancestor, little Thrinaxodon, is small enough to find shelter from the storm. Will Thrinaxodon be the lone survivor? "50 years into the disaster, volcanic eruptions continue in Siberia. However, now the lava carries a new killer to the surface. In a lethal twist of fate, the Siberian traps are situated over one of the largest coal reserves in the prehistoric world. Trapped within the coal is a noxious and volatile substance, methane. Methane is a greenhouse gas 25 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. With this new addition to the already polluted atmosphere, global warming accelerates exponentially throughout the world. The level of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere is normally regulated by the planet's vegetation. But now, methane and CO2 levels are rising so fast that the plant life can't keep up.
There was a kind of runaway greenhouse model. One of the effects of heating the atmosphere and repeatedly reheating it is that it prevents plants from mopping up the excess carbon dioxide and kind of returning the atmosphere to its normal condition.
In what is now the Arizona desert, a tropical floodplain offers little escape from the oppressive conditions. The once majestic forests of conifers, the ancestors of today's evergreens, are dying by the millions. Plant life withers in the stifling heat. With vegetation the foundation of the food chain, starvation now runs rampant. Hardest hit are the large herbivores, like Dicynodon. Their bulging abdomens mask an intricate cluster of digestive organs that process the coarse roughage on which they subsist.
These sorts of things. They were largely low nutrition kinds of plants, so the plant eaters would have had to work hard. They would have been eating all day, probably.
Now the Dicynodon's food sources are literally drying up. And new generations aren't adapting fast enough to deal with the growing famine. Their numbers dwindle, but so do the others that feed upon them.
We need to understand there's a food chain operating so that the extinction of plants will affect everything, all the animals, whether they eat plants or not. And the sequence is, if you kill the plants, you lose all or most of the plant eaters. Therefore, you lose all or most of the flesh eaters because they have nothing to eat.
The Gorgons witness their largest food supply simply vanish before their eyes. Where once there was more than enough food to go around, now there's competition for even the smallest prey.
So you've got fewer herbivores. It takes a lot of herbivores, a big territory, to keep a top carnivore alive and happy. As you reduce the food of the herbivores, as there are fewer and fewer of them, they can support fewer and fewer of the Gorgons.
Their primitive reptilian jaw structure was never a problem when food was so abundant. But now, their inability to properly tear a carcass apart is costing them dearly. The gorgons are starving to death. It's 200 years since the extinction began. Earth keeps inching closer to complete destruction. It's a time of unprecedented annihilation, a depth of devastation never experienced before or since. One predator rises to power, Proterosuchus. The high temperatures are a boon to this cold-blooded creature.
There are times in Earth history when it's better to be a cold blood than a warm blood. If we have a world where it's already warm anyway and it never gets cold at night, I mean, this is a great place to be a cold-blooded animal. You need less energy.
Our ancient ancestor, Thernaxodon, is also fated for survival. Being a tiny scavenger, she has no problem living on morsels of food that nobody else wants.
Now you have all the insects in the world. You have dead meat that's out here. You have small reptiles. You have amphibians. You have a lot of food sources available to you. When you're a very big top carnivore, that's not the case.
Thernaxodon embodies tenacity. Where other creatures might give up in the face of such harsh conditions, she fights every day to keep herself and her offspring fed and protected. Perhaps it's her proto-mammalian instincts that drive her. Whatever it is, the future of all mammals, including mankind, depends on her unrelenting will to live. But the challenges are far from over. Now the great dying is invading the Permian Ocean. The destruction of this vast undersea kingdom, where 70% of all life resides, will push everyone and everything to the brink. Ten 10,000 years have passed since the Siberian traps first erupted. What started in an isolated region of northern Asia has now engulfed the whole planet. Life on Earth is on the precipice of complete extinction. Everywhere in Pangaea, the vegetation is dead and rotting. And when the summer monsoons strike, flash floods wash much of it out to sea. Along with millions of tons of topsoil. The influx of so much waste is turning the seas into a cesspool, and global warming is causing even more damage.
If you're warm everywhere on the planet, nothing drives air, nothing drives the oceans. At the end of the Permian then, we've heated the planet to the point that ocean currents stop. Once they stop, you start losing oxygen. Warm water holds less oxygen than cold water. And once oceans lose oxygen, you start killing things.
As the sea loses oxygen, life is smothered.
We've got good evidence of this stagnation of the oceans, that when you look at the rock record, you can see before the event there are abundant reefs with all kinds of life and creatures burrowing in the seabed and all the rest of it. After the crisis, the rocks go black. This is evidence that of the oceans that become poor in oxygen, they become stagnant.
There's no group of animals or plants that's unaffected. Many of the groups which had dominated ecosystems in the oceans for hundreds of millions of years disappeared. They're gone.
The ocean floor is littered with the remains of the dead. Only bacteria remains.
As the ocean changed from oxygen to oxygen-free, the microbial content changed from the friendly microbes, which are sort of life neutral to us, to a totally different group. This different group produces hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is a very toxic gas. If we start increasing it into the atmosphere, you can kill off land life, and this really seems to be what happened.
The hydrogen sulfide acts like a chemical weapon. Winds circulate the poison gas worldwide. Animals are killed in great swaths. But one creature proves resistant to these lethal clouds. Reptiles like Proterosuchus may have been immune to the effects of this toxic gas.
A new experiment's taking place by Mark Roth of the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Institute in Seattle has been showing that a reptile can survive a much higher level of hydrogen sulfide than a mammal can. It turns out that cold-bloodedness protects you against the H2S, the hydrogen sulfide.
And so it is time to take on the king of the jungle. A weary Gorgon approaches the watering hole. Just a few generations ago, Gorgon would have had the size and weight advantage in this match. Not anymore. Now the noxious environment has left him vulnerable. His kind is rapidly vanishing throughout the globe. It's now the ambitious Proterosuchus whose star is on the rise. He smells victory and his next meal. Proterosuchus and others like him are becoming top carnivores. 150,000 years after the Great Dying began, the Siberian lava flow that launched the greatest mass extinction ever known on planet Earth is now a mile deep, enough to encase 4 Empire State Buildings stacked one atop another. For as far as the eye can see, there is only eerie silence. The lush forests, gone. The refreshing streams, gone. The herds that once populated this fertile landscape, all gone.
From space, there's no green, there's no plants, there's just this huge landscape of rock.
From this wound at ground zero in Siberia, death has spread around the world. Once giant herds of Lystrosaurus were ubiquitous. Now only a lucky few persevere. Only staying on the move in an endless migration will keep them one step ahead of death. Millennia of hardship have seen the Lystrosaurus evolve into survivors. Now it's only the hardiest of the species that remain. They are smaller than their ancestors. They can go longer without food and water. And their survival instincts are razor sharp. Here in what is now Egypt, this band of migrating Lystrosaurus find a hidden treasure. Any fresh water in this arid desert world is worth fighting for. But this little stream won't just quench their thirst. It's about to change the destiny of their species and the history of life on Earth. Because another herd has been drawn to this very spring, a band of Lystrosaurus from South Africa. Both groups have evolved along parallel tracks, adapting to desert conditions, lower oxygen, foul air, and scarce food. Interbreeding will make this species even tougher. A new generation with the best genes from both families will survive the great dying. Still, the future of this species will depend on adaptation and chance.
There's a question of luck and design happening at two levels. They were lucky to survive, but then the ones that went on to rebuild the ecosystems, they also had good adaptations that fitted them to the future. So people need to separate those two aspects. How do you get through the crisis, and then what do you do afterwards?
Their cousins, the Dicynodons, haven't been as lucky. The rapidly changing world is too much for the species to bear. This is their only legacy. Sadly, the former master has come to a somber end. The last Gorgons die alone, diseased and starving. The proud, ferocious line of Gorgonopsid is now extinct, never to return. $1.2 million years after a killer volcanic episode nearly strangled the entire planet to death, only the faintest flicker of life remains.
Each of those species that survived was probably driven down to just a tiny little castaway surviving population. So those survivors were lucky in a sense, but they had a pretty grim time for a long time afterwards as the Earth recovered.
And from just a handful of survivors, evolution begins anew. But life's comeback won't be an easy journey. The world they've inherited is hostile when compared to the tropical wonderland of the Permian period.
As we study the early Triassic, 5 million years or so after this event, it took an awful long time before life even began to get better. So there's a long interval after this extinction where most groups of animals are just getting by.
The Lystrosaurus survived the apocalypse to inherit this new world. Their species has seen a dramatic transformation.
There's a big difference in the size of the Lystrosaurus between the Permian and the Triassic. Permian animals were doing really well, and they tended to be large, and whatever killed them going through that boundary knocked down the largest ones, and so the largest ones disappeared, but then the remainders was also on average smaller.
Another survivor, Proterosuchus, had been a bit player before the Permian extinction. Never more than 2 to 3% of Earth's population. Now, with the big warm bloods like Gorgon missing, they take over the hunter-killer niche.
Proterosuchus then led to, and there was the evolution of, a variety of archosaurs, which ultimately led to modern crocodiles on the one hand and modern birds on the other hand. In between, of course, we had the dinosaurs.
Luckily for us, our ancestor, Little Thrinaxodon, has also made it through the extinction.
Thrinaxodon is a key animal because now, looking back, that was nearest to our ancestor of all the survivors.
Thrinaxodon had the right stuff at the right time to ensure not only its own survival, but the future of all mammals, including the human race. For us, the story of the great dying has a happy ending, but it's also a cautionary tale. Earth could rage again at any time. Unleashing a slow, relentless stranglehold on our planet. The key question for us is, would we have the right stuff to survive a mass extinction? Or like the once mighty Gorgons, would evolution leave us in the dust?